Hello everybody and welcome back to KSP2. I'm so excited. I've got one heck of an episode for you today because today we turn our sights on Duna. Now Duna is the farthest we've ever gone in any of our KSP series. Any of our escaping Kerman, Duna was the farthest that I've ever been. I've seen other planets, just cheated my way through to kind of look at certain things here and there. But as far as anything that we've been capable of, today is our limit. Which means that if we can handle today's mission, everything from here on out is going to be new. And what a place to do it than KSP2. I've also been really excited to hear the soundtrack for Duna. From everything that I've heard, it's quite a good one. And so I'm excited to check that out. But first, we have a bunch of science to spend. And we're going to spend all of it just kind of unlocking this landing utilities. This has a lot of the stuff that I'm going to want for today's mission. But the problem is it's going to take a couple different nodes to unlock before we can get there. So thankfully the precision machining and the fairing constructions were things that we could use anyways, but unfortunately we had to kind of pigeonhole all our science there. We launched a quick rover which satisfied a contract and was able to get us the last amount of science which we used to unlock precision propulsion, which is a little bit of a waste because I forget to put any of these engines on our build today, so we could have used that science or saved it. But anyways, here we are getting into the build. We are going to start off with a probe. That is what's going to be doing our landing on Duna. I still haven't conquered escaping Duna's atmosphere, so as far as we're concerned today, it's a one-way trip. And if we're going to do a one-way trip, let's do it with a probe. So we're going to put a couple parachutes on here, a top one and a couple radial mounted, and some retractable solar panels and communication dishes. Throw some fuel on there. I kind of want to reorganize how I'm doing. I don't need as many batteries as I carried. So we're going to make it even smaller, a little more compact, which means that it'll take even less to land. We're going to put an engine on here, and this is primarily going to be our landing engine. It's going to just kind of take us down safely. So as you see there, I grabbed an engine that we already had before. And we're going to take a couple Science Juniors, and we're going to clip them into the side of there, keep everything nice and compact. So looking at our chart, it's going to take 1450 delta V to land by engines alone. So we're going to throw a couple more parachutes on there. We get rid of the top parachute, but bring that back eventually anyways. Unfortunately, none of my decouplers are small enough to be a nice fit. Let's see, there we are. We put the top parachute back on. But none of my decouplers are small enough to make a nice fit, so we're going to have to just use one of the bigger ones. So I'd like to use a command pod because we are going to bring Kerbals here as well. But due to the size of the decoupler, it kind of forced our hand into using the bigger command pod. So we are going to bring 3 Kerbals. The more the merrier, right? So let's throw some retractable solar panels on there because we are going to be needing to bring them back home. But let's also forget to put a decoupler or a heat shield on there. Let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to be using nuclear propulsion for our interplanetary stage, our capture burn, and our return stage. And so this is the first time that we've used these engines in KSP2, so I'm interested to see how they will handle. Unfortunately, we don't have any kind of test flight, crash mod, or anything like that, so we're kind of just eyeballing the stats, seeing what we can do with what we have. I spent way too much time trying to make these side tanks aerodynamic just only to give up and make them pointy. I wanted it to, you know, kind of hug inwards like this, but we don't have any angled top fins, so it just looked weird, so I'm going to just make them straight. But yeah, I'm, like I said before, I'm just kind of eyeballing these engines. I feel that this will be plenty to get us into orbit, And we may even be able to utilize some of our center rocket to push ourselves out of Kerman's sphere of influence, which would be nice. Anything to save the amount of fuel that we have in our nuclear propulsion stage. Alright, looking at the stats again, it says that I don't have enough, however, but we are going to be aerobraking during certain parts of our journey, so it's not very accurate anyways. So now it's time to pick the crew, and I want to pick Munlock because I like her name, and we definitely got to pick Billy Bobley. He's a veteran of spaceflight, and he's got to see Duna for himself as well. So we're going to name this under the... oh, we picked Tim C. Kerman. So we're going to name this the Duna series. We're going to remove this and kind of readjust some things on the probe. I wanted to find a way to bring more, so I'm putting on some radial decouplers, and I thought this might be an easy way to kind of just like carry them with us and drop them off where we need. But unfortunately, they didn't want to snap to the decouplers, and I didn't feel like trying to clip them through and make it seem like it was attached, even if it wasn't. So I just decided to get rid of that idea and just stick with the top probe. Okay, so let's check our staging, make sure that's right. Thankfully, it's very few stages. We're going to add a little bit more fuel to the side boosters. Let us have a little bit more delta V on that early stage. And, of course, we are going to add fuel lines for not asparagus staging, but just to add the fuel lines. Throwing on some struts to make sure everything is wobble-free. So we strut the side boosters to each other. Strut the side boosters to the center, strut the center to the second stage. And of course, I made sure to double check our crew, and they did indeed leave their seats. So we did the same crew, except instead of Tim C. Kerman, we're bringing a girl by the name of Ronwise, and so she will be joining as well. I think Tim is going to be more of a flight pilot once we start doing planes and stuff, and I think we'll start doing planes soon. So just going through some last minute inspections, making sure our staging is correct. Very important to do before putting out on the launch pad. But this is ready. I think we're ready to go to Duna. So here we are, launch pad 1, midday I would say, and excited to break the boundaries and see what KSP Duna is really like. So we get the pre-launch countdown. The 3, 2, 1, and ignite. I think the thrust to weight ratio is somewhere like 2.8 on this thing. It's quite a hefty beast there, easy to take on. So we're going to be skipping ahead in a little bit. Just want to take one last look at these glorious clouds before we leave the planet behind. But since it's a fairly standard launch profile, it's kind of how we've gotten to orbit in all the previous episodes, so we're going to go ahead and skip forward to the actual circularization, and we'll see you once we are in orbit. But not before we take one last look at these stars. Love the way that they just come into view once you get high enough. Alright, so here we are, finishing up our circularization burn. I'm turning down the gimbal on our engine because it was starting to wobble a little bit, and that's one of the easiest ways to prevent that, is turning down the gimbal. So there we are. We are now in orbit. I'm going to be doing some skipping ahead until we actually get to Duna. There's, just some things that don't need to waste your time focusing on. However, I will be spending some time on the actual maneuver plan. What you saw there with that little angle that I made with my mouse is the correct angle for a Duna transfer, or the most ideal angle for a Duna transfer. So we're going to try to time warp our way to get that. However, we are in too low of an orbit that the game does not want to allow us to time warp as fast as we might need to, because it is afraid of the ship hitting the atmosphere and all the physics of that, so understandable. So what we're going to do is we're going to lift our apoapsis until we're just at the border right before we break the sphere of influence, because that'll save us some time when we go to exit later, because we'll already be at the edge of the sphere of influence. And then once we get that all set, we are going to raise our periapsis as well. And by being farther away from the planet, the game will allow us to time warp a little faster. So there we are. We're going to go ahead and warp to the apoapsis, point prograde, and just push out our periapsis. There we go. Just 1,000 kilometers is doable enough. And as you can see down in the bottom, we have the full control of our time warp. That last time warp has always been unavailable. I am assuming that it was reserved for interstellar time warping. Makes sense, you know, it's something faster than what we have here, but nonetheless, we're going as fast as we can. Sorry for flipping around the camera. But now we are at a better angle. It's still not ideal. I think if I were to close the distance between them, it would be a little more efficient. But nonetheless, it's actually a decent angle. So what we're going to do is we are going to bring our focus back to our ship and plot out our escape. And we're just going to warp to the periapsis. I was initially planning on doing this by eyeball, but the last second I decided instead to create a maneuver plan. We're skipping ahead a little bit. I had to redo my maneuver plan a couple times because I just wasn't happy with the positioning of it. But here's the one that we ended up working with. So as you see here, we're extending out our prograde momentum to extend out our altitude. And this is what I like to do. I feel like this is a good way of making your connections, is adding a little bit of radial burn. Either radial in or radial out, and this kind of shifts your orbit over to the side without really adjusting your altitude all that much. So the other trick you can do is moving when you make your burn, and so you can kind of shift that around and get different options. So as you see there, by putting it at our apoapsis, it brings ourselves. I kind of noticed in hindsight, I think we might have had a better connection before changing it to our apoapsis. It took me a second to realize what just happened there, because it sounded like our thing made our maneuver, but what I did was I dragged our maneuver plan around and it had passed our ship, and that's why he made that sound. But yeah, like I mentioned before, I kind of wanted to spend a little extra time on just focusing on this maneuver planning, because this is the first time that we've gone interplanetary in KSP2, and it's definitely a different kind of maneuver node maker than the first game. So just kind of wanted to show you the process of getting from Kerman to Duna in KSP2. Or at least my process. There might be better. I am definitely no expert, but I get by. So here we are, just changing a few of our directions, just adding a little bit here and there, ever so slowly, to bring those two ones, the two positions of the craft and the planet, together until they make connection and we have a flyby. So what I have is kind of good enough, but so we're going to just kind of utilize that maneuver right now, and then we will fine-tune it later. I'm looking at the portraits here, and for a second there I thought we hadn't added our third Kerbal Ronwise, but it was just because the computer was taking up one of the seats instead. So let's go ahead and fire that maneuver. I'm really surprised that we still have our mainsail engine. I was sure that it was either going to be utilized up just after orbit, or some way in the getting out of the sphere of Kerbin's sphere of influence. But no, it's taking us interplanetary. I was quite surprised. So that little setup of 4 mainsail side boosters and a mainsail center tank with the fuel lines that can get you pretty far. Alright, so now we have pushed out our orbit, but of course things will change once we leave Kerbin's sphere of influence. We can only do so much going from one sphere of influence to another, so it's best to really fine-tune your interplanetary maneuvers out in orbit of the sun. See, as you see here, it changed a little bit. So let's go ahead and transmit our science, because we are now in a new biome. I think we might have done some science out here before, but I can't remember. So just kind of midway, just somewhere midway in our orbit, we're going to make this maneuver, this little mid-course correction. And once again, the 2 main things I'm going to be using are prograde to move ourselves faster, and that brings our rendezvous closer, and then orbital out, which kind of shifts us left and right. But we didn't have to do too much orbital out. All we really needed was a little bit of prograde, and we made connection. It's not a great connection. We'll be only coming in the sphere of influence for a little bit, so we're going to add a little bit of normal to it, which gets us on a better plane, and then playing around with the prograde again. We're using the retrograde control, but we're pushing it in so that it's going prograde. So let's go ahead and lower this periapsis until we have a nice low one, because I want to come in hard and fast and get a nice orbit going, so that way when we drop off our probe, it doesn't have to fight too much to get down to the surface. So there we go. We have our maneuver. It's only going to take, what is that, 38 delta V? So we're going to turn down our thrust quite considerably, because this mainsail is super heavy in a vacuum. So we don't want it to just jam on the power and go right past our mark. So we are going to just burn for longer, much slower, and that'll give us the precision we need. So let's go ahead and plot this into K2D2 and let that handle the burn. As you see here, it's just pushing out just a little puff, just a tiny little plume, just enough to push the craft in the way that it needs to go. So now we're going to check on our map a little bit. Focus on Duna. Get rid of our maneuver so we can see what our actual trajectory is. And there we go. So we're going to just do a little bit of manual correction, pointing ourselves retrograde, and then burning ever so slightly. And it goes over the top of it. Our periapsis drops, but then eventually it starts rising again. That's because it went to the top. So let's go ahead and point ourselves normal. That brings us in. We're 376 kilometers above the surface. We could probably get a little closer. 134. That's pretty good. We don't want to get too close. We're not trying to aero brake here. We're going to use our engines to circularize. So 134 kilometers above the surface should be good. So now it's just a matter of time warping until we get into Duna's sphere of influence. Kind of pacing between Kerman. It's almost like we're in a race right now. It's kind of fun. I really like watching the 2 objects come together. It's very exciting. This is a very exciting moment. I always struggled going interplanetary, and I was surprised at how easy it was in this in this game, KSP2. I'm not saying that it's any easier or harder in KSP1. It's just it was really intuitive with the tools they have, and these little entry and exit. I guess just feature just the little HUD that shows us where you enter from, where you exit from, what the actual sphere of influence is. Super helpful. But here we are in Duna, high space above Duna. We're just going to plot our circularization burn at the periapsis. I bring it in way close, and at first I'm like, yeah, let's just get a nice low orbit because that's what we're going to want anyways. But I'm going to be utilizing a lot of my fuel. I'm going to utilize the last of the mainsail fuel, but then I'm going to spend quite a bit of delta V out of our nuclear engine, and I don't think I want that. There's no need to use that much fuel. We're not aerobraking. We don't need to have an orbit that low because we're not planning on bringing our Kerbals down to the surface. We can't really land with the nuclear engine, and if we were to use our parachutes, then we wouldn't have them to come home with. So we're just gonna leave our apoapsis way high like that, so that way it doesn't take much to leave. And we're gonna be using a little bit of our nuclear engine fuel, but that's okay. But we're gonna get rid of the rest of the mainsail. Here we are approaching Duna rather quickly. I wish K2D2 didn't time warp so fast. Wow, look at that. That is gorgeous. We're going to be going to Duna, or actually we're going to be going to another planet, whichever one we discover first in KXP soon enough. And I'd love to compare what KSP with parallax, environmental, visual enhancements, scatter, all that, what that compares to with these graphics. So I forgot that I turned down my thrust, and K2D2 was plotted for that amount of thrust, so when I increased it, it kind of broke K2D2, and it sent us into a bit of a spiral. So went ahead and got rid of that, and we're just going to manually burn. Fortunately, we have like no fuel left, so let's go ahead and kick off that stage and use our nuclear engine to get back to it, get ourselves into orbit. As you see in the numbers in the lower left, we are bringing ourselves down, and so now we are captured around Duna. So it's a little bit lower than I had plotted as well. I just kind of let the engine go. Not the smartest. That is the fuel that we need to go home, so we will see whether or not we have enough. So let's go ahead and get a Kerbal out, do some science in the space above Duna. Munlock has the honor because she needs to defy her namesake and not be locked to the Mun to explore the vastness of space. So she will be the first intrepid pilot to go untethered in the space above Duna. Very exciting. So once we get her safely aboard, we're going to lower our periapsis until we're within the atmosphere, and we will be on a trajectory that will take us to Duna's surface. So we want to adjust it just slightly. We don't want to come in too hard. We don't have a heat shield on our probe, so we're going to 42 kilometers, which is just below the atmosphere line. I believe the atmosphere starts at 50 kilometers on Duna. So we point towards the planet and separate our craft. Go ahead and spin it around, check to make sure that we have control, which we do. Excellent. Then we're going to come back to this, but we need to get our Kerbals back into orbit. They can't come down to the planet surface with us, so let's go ahead and point ourselves retrograde for some reason. I don't know why it was retrograde that we needed, but oddly enough, we point ourselves retrograde. We go ahead and fire our engine, and that lifts our periapsis enough that we are no longer going to be coming down to the atmosphere. Okay, so now it is time to follow the journey of the probe. This probe is going to be our first lander on Duna. We will be coming back with Kerbal soon enough because we are going to need to discover the monument. And unfortunately, this probe is not sophisticated enough to land at a very specific location. So this is just going to be making history. It's going to be a great little probe, and hopefully, if it can complete its mission, it'll be a very happy probe. So let's go ahead and retract the solar panels. Unfortunately, we can't retract the communication dishes without potentially losing signal. Well, that doesn't matter right now because there's no commnet. I decided let's just keep them open just in case there's any problems. So now we're just going to time warp until we hit the atmosphere and get to experience the Duna soundtrack for the first time. So I started to realize that we're going to be coming in the dark side of the planet, so we're going to just utilize our fuel to avoid that, and all we can get is the twilight zone of it, so that's the best we're going to do. Unfortunately, fuel was meant to be utilized for landing to stop ourselves from impact, so since we no longer have that, we will have to have faith in our parachutes. So fun fact, there's nothing wrong with the color on your screen. The sunsets and sunrises of planets like Mars, red planets like that, actually go blue. This is scientifically accurate. And as we've come to expect, when we approach the surface, the music slowly fades out. We are left to our own devices for the few 100 meters or so before we touch down. We seem to be falling at a slow enough rate that I have no fear that we're going to land safely, but unfortunately the sun is gone and we are left in the dark. Oh. Well, that was easy. There we go. We have landed on Duna. Unfortunately, there's no mission to be had for landing on Duna, only the specific monument itself, but nonetheless, we have taken our first steps towards that. So let's go ahead and turn on the solar panels so that way we can absorb some solar power before we die. However, we're going down into the long, cold night. We're going to wait until morning to kind of take a look around because we want to see this planet that we arrived at. And before we know it, the sun starts to dawn. Like I mentioned before, blue sun first, and then the sky gets orange. So now it actually looks like we're on the red planet. So let's did our science, did whatever we could to make use out of this probe. I realized I didn't put any landing legs on it. I definitely rushed that. Definitely didn't think about landing, but nonetheless, it didn't need to go anywhere once it's down. So with nothing else to do with this little probe, we decided to turn it into an impromptu rover. And let's see if maybe it can get to a different biome and maybe do a little more science, or maybe do some science in the air above the ground, considered that it's like space low. We go ahead and transmit all. Yeah, let's go ahead and aim for the bottom of the hill there and see if we can get another biome out of this. So yeah, we have our first rover on Mars too. Or Mars. Duna. I honestly can't wait to get RP1 going again. Actually be talking in real terms like Earth and the Moon and Mars. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First there's KSP2, then there's KXP. And eventually we'll make it to the moon. Making it to the moon in RP1 is hard enough. Oh, well there we go. That is the end of its rover life and the end of our probe. And that's okay. It did everything that it needs to do. In the next episode, we're going to bring our Kerbals home and then think about bringing them right on back. But anyways, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you're looking forward for more KSP2. If you did, please consider giving me a like, drop me a comment, let me know your thoughts, and I will see y'all in the next one. Take care.